Welcome back to Faith on Film, where we raid your church library in search of the good stuff. My name is Nathan, and this... Steph, we're supposed to review The Apostle today. That's what the Resurrection Rabbit gave us. You're being punished because you got the Easter videos up late. Have fun reviewing this movie with yourself. Steph. Well, never mind then. We're a generation of men raised by women. I'm wondering if another woman is the answer we really need. You want to talk about Fight Club, don't you? I always do. Alright, what's on your mind? The God's Unwanted Children line? Nope. Riddle me this. Is Fight Club a Buddhist movie? You're kidding me. I most certainly am not. It's the quintessential exploration of nihilism, anti-consumerism, toxic masculinity, and repressed homosexuality that the late 90s had to offer. How is that Buddhist? Are you going to let me explain or not? You've piqued my curiosity. What are your credentials? I'm you? I know. What's your experience with Buddhism? I once identified as a Zen Buddhist. Well, as much as a Buddhist identifies as anything. Okay, it's good enough for our purposes. What's your experience with Fight Club? Have seen Fight Club? Good enough. I'll hear you out. I'm assuming everyone watching this has seen Fight Club or at least knows the basics, which is to say, I'm not holding back on spoilers. Ed Norton's character, known only as the narrator, lives a life consumed by consumption. He is in a very real sense trapped by his desire. He longs to create an identity, an ego, if you will, out of the things he can afford to surround himself with. He asks himself in voiceover, what kind of dining set defines me as a person? And yet none of these things bring him even a semblance of happiness. This all parallels the first two noble truths of the Buddha. Existence consists of suffering, or dukkha. Dukkha is caused by attachment, or tanha, sometimes translated as desire or thirst. Because the narrator is trying to construct a permanent self out of impermanent things, he is stuck in the wheel of samsara. This is further illustrated when he finally finds some relief from his dukkha by attending support groups for ailments he doesn't even have so he can pretend to express feelings with others. When Marla shows up and is as obvious a liar as he is, he can no longer enjoy himself and so falls right back into dukkha. Because coming to these support groups was itself an impermanent thing, it cannot satisfy him. But all of that changes when he meets Tyler Durden. Tyler expresses a philosophy that the trappings of the modern world are all hollow lies, and that consumerist culture has pacified people. At one point he accuses Martha Stewart of polishing the brass on the Titanic. It's all going down. Once the narrator's apartment, with all of his very expensive possessions, blows up, Tyler instructs him that, hey, it's all meaningless junk. It's only when you're not afraid to lose everything that you're finally free to do anything. In his own crass way, Tyler is expressing the third noble truth of the Buddha. The way out of suffering is by extinguishing the tanha. In order to bring themselves to their lowest point physically and thus relinquish all attachments, Tyler and the narrator live together in a run-down, dilapidated house in an empty neighborhood and sustain themselves by stealing fat out of a liposuction clinic's garbage and repackaging it as soap, which they then sell. Most importantly, though, they start a fight club, which is a weekly and eventually daily gathering where men meet together in a basement to beat the tar out of each other. At this point, you may be wondering, how is any of this Buddhist? Don't tell me what I'm thinking. I'm you. I already know where you're going with this. Just play along for the sake of the people at home. Very well. How is any of this Buddhist? Buddhism is all monks sitting quietly in meadows and rock gardens and yoga. Wrong. I know. That is American upper-class white people Buddhism, my friend. Old school Buddhism is way more intense. In fact, there's a legend about the second patriarch of the Chinese Chan school, roughly equivalent to the Japanese Zen school, where he cut off his own arm in order to prove his sincerity as a student to Bodhidharma. And this was even before he was taken on as a student. Buddhism is very much about becoming free from the world and all its trappings, including one's own body, including one's own sense of self. And that's Tyler's philosophy in a nutshell. Break down everything that makes you, you, in order to free yourself. Deliberately seek out pain as a means to free yourself from seeking pleasure. Well, this is all very interesting and all, but what you conveniently forgot to mention is that Tyler is a massive hypocrite. While he may rail against modern society for turning men into unthinking drones, he does exactly that himself once Fight Club escalates into Project Mayhem. No longer content with simply reducing themselves to embracing nothingness, he now sends his men out to actively destroy things and reduce society to nothingness. To top it all off, he treats his men like personalityless drones, even stripping them of their own personal names. They are just pawns in his war against consumerism. Various Buddhist schools may have implemented some pretty harsh methods for obliterating the ego, but once it branches out into destroying others' property and well-being, that's not particularly Buddhist in any meaningful sense. It's more like weaponized nihilism, something that the Buddha repeatedly opposed. Actually, that's something we should zoom in on for a moment. Tyler's philosophy and methods have often been compared to Heath Ledger's Joker, but I haven't heard anyone calling the Joker a secret Buddhist. So why is it that when Tyler destroys things in order to teach the world that it's holding on to meaningless concepts like life and right and wrong, why is that called a Buddhist philosophy, whereas the Joker is not? Rhetorical question, you'll get your chance to speak. I think it's because we're only shown Tyler's true nature slowly over time. Sure, the in media res opening shows him holding a gun in the narrator's mouth, but we don't have context for this. Once the narrator meets Tyler for the first time in the past, we start to get the sense that this might just be an elaborate object lesson to get the narrator to let go rather than to cause any actual harm. And this interpretation is strengthened by a scene where Tyler holds a convenience store clerk at gunpoint to convince him that he's wasting his life and to go pursue the thing that he actually wants to do, which turns out to be becoming a veterinarian. Once the clerk runs off, the narrator realizes that the gun was never actually loaded. So Tyler has unconventional and scary methods, but he means well. Right? Right? And that's exactly the point. In addition to being a domestic terrorist, it would also be accurate to say that Tyler is a cult leader. And cults don't recruit by saying up front, oh, by the way, we plan on cutting you off from everyone you love and coercing you into sleeping with our leader whenever he wants, or committing suicide. It's a subtle manipulation of cognitive dissonance. Once you start to like an organization, you get a little more involved, you get more invested. The more invested you are, the more you get to know about them. And then once you're very invested, that's when they hit you with the real truth. Had you been told that right away, you would have backed out. But because you've already invested so much emotion, time, and effort into it, you're more easily convinced to rationalize it. That's how Project Mayhem gets rolling. By bringing in disenfranchised men and telling them they'll get to feel like real men, get to feel free, by brawling on the floor, Tyler builds their trust. Then it becomes, go pick a fight with a stranger and intentionally lose. Seems like a natural progression, right? Then it becomes random acts of vandalism. Then it becomes, don't ask questions. Then it becomes castrating the people who would dare oppose the project's plans, including previously loyal members. Then it becomes blowing up multiple credit card buildings in a single night. Because we, the audience, are right there with the narrator for this entire process, it becomes easier to digest the appealing, if counterintuitive, messages that Tyler espouses, and that is why I think people are more likely to sympathize with his acts of terrorism than they are with those of the Joker. And that's how they get you. Tyler bears only superficial similarities to Buddhism, and that is because of the important fourth noble truth, the Eightfold Path. There are cases to be made that the members of Fight Club are following some of the points of the path, but not all of them. Tyler encourages his followers to lie, which violates right speech. He repeatedly sleeps with Marla despite not caring even remotely about her, which violates right effort. And since right conduct excludes theft, killing, and injuring, while right resolve promotes compassion, pretty much the entirety of Project Mayhem is right out. And that's 4 out of 8. And yet... Okay. Impress me. I always do. It's true that Tyler goes way off the deep end. But the movie isn't about Tyler, is it? It's about the narrator. And it's important to remember that the narrator rejects Tyler's extremism. It's kind of the point of the third act. Ultimately, the narrator learns from Tyler's philosophy, but has to defeat him by realizing that Tyler is only a figment of his own imagination. There's a famous Zen koan that goes, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." There's a wide variety of interpretations of this, as there are with all koans. It's kinda their shtick. But the general idea seems to be anything that's external to you, whether that be a teacher, a given teaching, or even your own concept of what an ideal human being, an ideal Buddha, is like, you have to transcend that. You have to transcend all of those realities in order to find the Buddha nature among the things you call yourself. Now, the narrator applies this fairly literally by killing Tyler in the climax. Tyler was an aspect of himself that took on a life of its own to teach the narrator how to live free of attachments. The narrator demonstrated that liberation by shooting himself in the mouth in order to be free of Tyler. He had grown beyond the destructive philosophy that Mr. Durden preached. This also bears similarity to what the Buddha called the middle path. Before setting out on his quest to extinguish Tanha, the Buddha Siddhartha Gautama lived a lavish life of luxury. Once he sought an end to Tanha, he lived a garish life of asceticism, barely eating, pushing himself past any healthy limits. It was only once he looked for a middle ground between these two extremes that he became the Buddha. Likewise, it is only once the narrator rejects both the extremes of defining himself by his possessions and Tyler's plans of destroying all around them that he finds peace. Well, all right. You've succeeded in impressing me. Thank you. However, knew that was coming. The film never explains what the narrator's new philosophy is upon defeating Tyler. It knows that Tyler is wrong on some points, but not which ones he may be right on. So the middle path you claim it espouses is left entirely up to the viewer to decide. Right. It's up to the audience to think about that part for themselves. Right, so naturally it's only a Buddhist movie if you want it to be. Well, what are you doing? You mean to say it's a riddle with no definitive answer designed to get the listeners to think about it on a more personal level and achieve insight on their own? Ow. Dang it, it's a koan. How did I not see that coming? So it might be a little more Buddhist than you gave it credit for. Yes. I would still say that that's not the best reading of the movie, but there is a compelling case to be made in favor of it. Glad you at least see my point. What do we do now? We could watch Into the Woods and have a prolonged discussion about ethics afterwards. Can we sing? Why wouldn't we? I am so game. Thank you for joining us. I'm Nathan. And I'm Nathan. We'll see you next time.